Hello there. Welcome to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. As Leonard Gildarie, my co-host, would say, good night, good evening, good morning. It depends on the time zone you're in and that you're watching us. This program comes to you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. It's 1 hour and it comes live. We're in the studio recording it live. So please take your smartphone, go to Guyanese Critic Facebook page or TBN Guyana. You type in TBN Guyana and you will see us there and on YouTube. Last Wednesday, our guest who needed no introduction. Turned out that we didn't have a program because there was blackout. Our guest last Wednesday was supposed to be Ravi Dev. As I said before, Ravi Dev needs no introduction. We're glad that he has given us his presence again this evening. Whether you agree with Ravi's theorizations, conceptualizations, paradigms, or what have you, whether you disdainful of them, you reject them, there's one thing that cannot be denied. Ravi Dev is one of Guyana's most formidable intellectuals. He was here a few months ago and we didn't exhaust the intellectualism of Ravi Dev and his take on social phenomena. I doubt whether we will exhaust the hour. But welcome to my co-host. I refer to him as Guyana's evergreen journalist, Leonard Gildarie. He normally does a few introductory remarks. But before he does that, I don't know if you looked at this last Friday evening. A snake almost killed him. He found the snake in his car and he thought the snake went away. And when he reached the culture center, the snake almost killed him. He came out of the car bawling for people to help him, but nobody helped him and the snake disappeared. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but a few introductory remarks by Leonard Gildarie and then we'll come to the intellect of Ravi Dev.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good night and thank you very much. Very eloquent of my co host. He's joined the ranks of Ron Robinson and Mahathir Shivraj when it comes to drama in Guyana. Um, Freddie, as always, things bother me or I look at things that happen across Guyana, and two things came to my attention this weekend. I was paying close attention to the bridge, the harbor bridge, and I became fearful every time. And I think one of the priorities, and I know it is one of the priorities for this government. I know that the Minister of Housing was in the Peters Isle area, but 20 houses have to be removed to make way for the Harbour Bridge in that configuration alongside the Princess Hotel, straight down to the Coca at the Demerara River there. But I was amazed that the Harbour Bridge management and they are doing a wonderful job of keeping that bridge alive. But imagine our guest who's here with us tonight could not have been able to make it today had that bridge, that repairs that they were doing, could not be completed within the stipulated, I think, 24 hours that they would have been working on. They got very early up last night. So I want to say kudos, but it's a frightening thing, and we got to move with all haste to complete another harbor bridge within the next 5 years or at least 3, 4 years. I'm not sure the timeline, but we're going to hear more about that. It's going to be a major project, probably the biggest impacting project that this country will ever have, along with the gas to shore project that they have. The other one that took my attention, Freddie, and that's something we have to have a handle on, is a report that's coming out now, and a lot of business people are complaining that there's no foreign currency to be had in this country. The banks are taking a long time, and I'm not sure where is the foreign currency going. I think the private sector, I think Paul Chung, who's the chairperson, has written the Bank of Guyana for a meeting to have a discussion on whether there's a shortage. The Bank of Guyana is saying no, it could be an issue of hoarding. But if we're bringing in so much investments into the country, where's the foreign currency going? Yes, we have to buy raw materials and other stuff abroad, but where's the money? Is it that a few companies are taking it out through another way? We know there's a big money laundering case happening now, some strange things, but it needs to be investigated because we need to know so we can be stabilized. Because if there's a capital flight out of this country, or there's a flight of foreign currency out to this country that cannot be explained, our local businesses are going to feel the squeeze. price of goods could go up. So I leave that there, but that's something needs to be discussed.
Thank you, Leonard. When you said that I dramatized the thing, maybe I dramatized it, but I just want viewers to know who missed Friday evening. You did say that the snake emerged. We emerged when you were by the culture center, and nobody turned up to help. But anyway, if you just join us, our guest this evening is no stranger to controversy, no stranger to intellectual analysis, Ravi Dev. Ravi, I hope we can have you back here again in another few months, because there is so much to talk about, and there's so much the past 20 years that you have put your analytical mind to. Now, I know when we arranged this discussion, we have in mind that you will put your analytical voice to race and class, but you did indicate to me that you want to deal with the mythology and myths of Burnham's greatness. Speaking for myself, I don't endorse any concept of Burnham being a great man. But let's hear your thoughts on Burnham, and then we'll go to more complex issues.
Well,
Oh, let me stop you. The last time you were here, you wore a suit and tie. What you have done, DONNED, this evening, is what you are known for in Guyana. Gildarie, the tunic.
I like it
The
actually. It looks
the
very.
neo tunic.
Uh,
This is what you have been known for. This is what you have worn.
it's something
Most
that's
of them
very
since you
elegant. I
came
like
back.
it actually.
well, let me get back to
I didn't know
topic
you.
of thing. But no, the thing is
You
that
don't want to have
Before
a
you
sartorial.
start,
You know,
critic I saw was wearing one or something that looked like
he
that.
went to India.
yeah,
So we'll skip the sartorial world of Avidev and
yeah.
go on to the.
No, I think it's like in everything, the whole notion of what is semiotics. What do you signal by certain things? And clothes do send out signals. And I deliberately, when I returned to Guyana, because Indian culture was so derided, Indian culture was so much seen as being backward and what have you, I deliberately chose to don these Indian garb back in those days. In that time, that was a Nehru suit, and even though it was worn by third world leaders in Africa also, it became known popularly as the Nehru suit back in those days. This one, interestingly enough, uh, might be known as the Nehru, as the Modi vest. Fashions change, so you simply pull this one over. But it's again to signal my orientation that in Guyana here, culture plays a very, very significant role, like it does in all cultures. It's just that, as I said once before, there was this whole story about some fishes swimming in the water, and an older fish comes up and says, "Hey guys, how y'all doing? How's the water?" And after a little while, the two young fishes says, "Water? What's water?" And that's culture. People don't think about culture, but we are all embedded in particular cultures. And those cultures both explain the world to us and also tell us what is quote unquote proper. So if we want to talk about Guyana, one of the things we must put on the agenda would be the whole notion of culture. So if we want to segue into Mr. Burnham, it was interesting that when Mr. Burnham went to Britain after World War II and did his law degree in 4 years, when he came back with a Churchillian accent. You get me? The man spoke with the same cadences of Churchill. He those same pauses, the same articulation. He dressed a particular way. And much of what Burnham attempted, much of it goes back to the culture in those days, in the 1950s, when he came back in 1950 itself. What were you supposed to be? Who represented being Guyanese? Who represented who would then take over from the British? So it is not an insignificant concern, because you're signaling something. So to combat what you and I have spoken about, race, class, and Burnham, because this is his 100th birth anniversary, and he's been in the news and so on and so forth. I think that's where we have to talk about, well, how far removed, if any, are we from the Guyana which Burnham found himself into. And at the time of Burnham, at that time, you had a colored Creole class that was nurtured by the British, that literally patterned themselves on the British, not only in manner of speaking, not only in manner of dressing, but they literally thought that the white blood that they had made them the natural inheritors of power when the British were to leave. And by 1945, 1950, when Burnham came back, everybody knew the British was going to leave, because the Moyne Commission report was then released, and elections were going to be in the air. So we have to look, and we can use the whole notion of culture and look at Guyana then, Burnham within that culture, what he did and what he had to do, and where we are today, and to talk about where are we headed, and culture can be one of the modes of analysis we can use.
Before we get back to Burnham, and I know you want to talk Burnham, you did Sigmund Freud, and I'm sure you're familiar with Freud extensively. It had to be Freudian that a man would ride on horseback in working class areas and be sharing out cassava stick and cigarettes. What is the Freudian interpretation of that?
Well, again, you see, you can look at it psychologically at that area, but what I'm saying to do, I would like to look at it sociologically on a broader scale. Because if you look at it, psychologically, it might be confined to one individual and his idiosyncrasies. But Burnham, sociologically, represented the black African man in Guyana at that time, when there was a disjuncture, a clear disjuncture between the colored ones and the black ones, and of course then came the Indian. Unlike in America, where their one drop of white made you black, in the Caribbean and in the British colonies, the one drop, as Duvalier once said, made those persons think they are white. So in Guyana, the colored class, having that percentage of a variable percentage of whites in them, they were groomed. They were in the civil service, they were given priority preferences. They were in Queen's College, they were given preferences. In each area
God,
of
they
national
dominated Guyana. They dominated British
everything.
Guyana.
That's the whole point.
And
Burnham, and this is where we have to now look at Burnham. As an African man, he was pure black. His dad and his mom were both African. So even though his father was a headmaster in Kitty was in a village. People don't realize that. It was a village. That was like being in Plaisance. Kitty was like being in Plaisance in 1950. So when Burnham got into Queens, he was at Central before. He was beaten mercilessly at being of small stature at Central, according to his sister Jessie. Went over to Queens. Now remember, in Queens you had to pay in those days. But in Queens now, Burnham earns wins two scholarships, and then is allowed. But the point is, this is what I want to make. When Burnham, this African Guyanese boy, wins the Guyana scholarship, you understand? When he wins the Guyana scholarship in 1938, I believe, right? Or 40. The point is that he made the Africans, not the color, so proud. And that was what Burnham built his whole career on. Got that success early on. And we have to ask ourselves that if just a Guyana scholarship of a schoolboy could make a people so proud, imagine where those people were at and where they were considered. And that was the dominance of the colored class who made all these decisions. So I want now to talk about how Burnham, what he did. And when you talk about Burnham riding in horseback,
sharing out cigarettes to ordinary
he also rode on horseback. He took all those colored mulatto upper class who were in the civil service. took them to Hope Estate
Yeah.
and rode that horses,
And
and
they
they had
jumped
to
in the
jump
trench.
into the trench
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and made them do manual labor with cutlass. So if you want to talk about Freudian, that's Burnham. But in a certain way, he made a lot of Africans say, we're going to show them. You understand? Because those same mulatto upper class, they rode roughshod over ordinary Africans. And I come back to our common friend Andai. If you read Andai's book, and then in Small Acts, the magazine, right? David Scott has a whole long interview with her, and she writes
It's reproduced in her book.
in her book too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and in that book, she talks about her father, who was Burnham's doctor, was a black, but her mother was a mulatto, and she talks about how she was treated because she had to straddle those two worlds. And here, and this, if there's any book we should read in Guyana, it would be Andai's, because very few had the intellect and the honesty to go and talk about her personal travails of what it meant to be slightly colored, but she was on the dark side. And imagine what the ordinary black. So the point is that that class, when Burnham came, he had to, in a sense, butt up heads against that class. But he now, so when he came, they were shocked that he would join up with Jagan. And people like John Carter and W.O.R. Kendall, who were the part of that mulatto elite, they were they took him on. So when later he could not get the leadership of the PPP, that is when he decided to, as they say, tie bundle with that class.
Yeah, John Carter,
John Carter.
NDP came
But
in.
he had to. But being Burnham, as soon as he got into power, he dumped them. He destroyed that whole class because, as you may call it, Freudian. But to a certain extent, he was representing the average black person, you get me, who had been put down by those people to feel inferior because they didn't have a bit of white in them.
Before Leonard Gildarie comes in, he also carried a permanent resentment in his Freudian mind. He was rejected for membership by the League of Colored People. Initially, he was. They didn't want him around.
Well, that would be ironic, but we know because John Carter, they didn't see him. They felt that he should not have mixed with these coolies, and I talks about that because at that point, the Indians had achieved success from the rural areas. They had created a rice industry that was supplying the entire Caribbean with rice, bringing in huge amounts of foreign currency into the country through cattle. And Clem C. Chirano has written about all of this. But that success was on the outside. Within Georgetown, which at that time people they felt that that was Guyana. Within that, you have to understand that the Indian was still a coolie, as Andai writes. For example, Cherry. When Cherry left Queens and finished Queens, he's a Queens boy. But as he writes in his own book, when he went to apply to entrance into the civil service, which was seen as the epitome of achievement in Guyana, that was closed to him. Unlike a Martin Carter or unlike others who would come out of Queens and get a job if you were a mulatto, he was refused. And that's where, when his dad took him to the Indian leader who was Jang Bahadur Singh, and Jang tells his father, why you send the boy to study outside? You understand? Jang told him that. And that's how the old man decided to send him abroad. But the point is, we have to understand that at that juncture, Indians were literally beyond the pale. Because you had a social structure with the whites who would soon depart. You had the colored who expected to inherit that. Then you had the blacks, and then you had the Indians. Blacks like Burnham could enter that, and I think Lewis writes about this.
Arthur Lewis.
How not Arthur, the other Lewis, I forget his first name, he's a Welsh fellow has written about that. So the point is that how could a black enter that colored class? Because when they talk about ethnic boundaries, there was a certain permeability to becoming colored. So if you spoke properly, if you dressed a particular way, if you got education, and most importantly, if you married fairer, then you could join that. And this is one of the reasons Burnham later married
a
via
mulatto
a
woman, yeah.
mulatto, to be part of that class. So yes, the
But
John.
Andaya became part of that class, you know, and you were personally,
Well,
Andaya became very much infused with the mulatto class.
but she was very conflicted about it, and her honesty, it comes
Yeah,
through
she was
in her
married to a white
honesty.
man. She was
Well,
married to a white
she
man.
lived with a white guy, Bill
Right.
Carr.
Common law marriage.
Yeah, yeah. But the point is, I want to come back to Guyana politics. And I think it is up to us to eke out in Guyana, because a lot of what is going on here, through people like David Hines and others, trying to instigate instability in this country, I think it goes back to the same kind of using the African, ordinary African person for their own ends. You understand? They may use a sort of particular kind of rhetoric, but what is it geared for? Is it really to lift those people out of the situation that they found themselves after slavery? Is it really to let them function in this modern world? I don't think so, even to today. Look at all the opportunities that are now opening up. All we hear about is you're denied this, you're denied that. But so it comes back to, I think we need to talk about very frankly, what is the relationship? We might not have the colored thing so strong today, but that way of using the black person for your own ends is still very strong. Let me just finish this. I want to say this. I'll give an example because I'm not talking theory here. I might have said it on the previous program. I sat when Mr. Hoyt passed away. I sat on the building of Parliament building, that, you know, the balcony there, when the average, the black lower classes came out and they were screaming and shouting. And you ought to hear the mulatto class at my side, who were on that, parliamentarians, how they spoke about that class. That was the class who put them into power. They're the ones who voted from South Georgetown and wherever. You go back and if you would listen to how they spoke about that, you get me? Very contemptuous.
Bobby, you know, this
and
is...
it comes back to how they see Aubrey Norton today.
Yeah, but Bobby, you know, Ravi, Leonard will come, you know, but this is the value of you on these programs. I remember the last time you were here, you said that Rupert Devine told you that he's comfortable more with the mulatto class.
In Mackenzie more than Mahika. Right.
So I'm going to come back to the Creole class, egging on people like David Hines. But Leonard Gildarie is waiting a long time.
You know, it's interesting to hear the angles on Burnham and hearing those kind of thoughts, because as a young man growing up, I grew up in Enmore, and you hear all kind of thing anti-Burnham and he banned flower and this and that. But there are many, I've seen chatter about Burnham and that he's done some good thing for this country. I name a couple that, and I'm talking with the Chattersells and the Harbour Bridge, the Linden Highway, the Country
NIS.
Center, NIS, and so on and so forth. I want to ask you, Mr. Dave, if you believe that, or what other else things that Burnham have done for this country that we could say that we're proud of. Do you believe that he's done anything at all?
When you look at a leader of a country, right, and this came up in a discussion on another forum with David Hines and an individual named Dr. Terence Blackman and Dr. Beetram Ramarak. And they said we should look at the big picture. And that's what I would like to look at. Burnham was a politician. I'm sure Dr. Ravi analogized Burnham to Hitler. And he said the only way is a difference of scale. That Hitler, of course, had this huge German economy, but they both strutted around in German uniform, in general's uniform. They both utilized the armed forces to further their own goals. And we could go on and on and on. So when I look at Burnham, I have to look at him. Hitler was a guy who liked babies. He had a woman named Eva Braun who he loved. He used to sing operas with Eva Braun. But that's not how we analyze Hitler or any leader. So when you ask me to analyze Mr. Burnham, we have to analyze him in the totality, as David said. So let me offer in totality. Burnham's most distinctive contribution to Guyana is to take the colony that he inherited in 1966.
Mm-hmm.
And in furtherance of his own personal ambitions, which was his overriding characteristic, he destroyed this country. We are till today, we had to be the laughing stock of the rest of the Caribbean. Even though when he took over, we were the equal of any one of the so-called Big Four. So what do I mean by that? His own sister, Jessie Burnham, writes a pamphlet called Beware, My Brother Forbes. In 1964, Jessie writes this. 1964. He hasn't taken power. And she predicts everything that Burnham would do. The underhandedness, the slyness, the cunningness, his ambition, his blind ambition. When Burnham was a teenager, he sits down with his father, who was a headmaster of Kitty Methodist Primary School. And he tells his father what he wants to be, his ambitions. And apart from being the Chief Justice of Guyana, apart from being the Attorney General, apart from being all sorts of things, he wants to be the Prime Minister of a united Caribbean, British Caribbean. And this was where he was in the 40s. He was a young boy. So Burnham's second characteristic was he was Machiavellian. As a student, and he himself said that, his Bible was the Prince of Machiavelli, where you see that the ends justify any means. So his ends were always what to push his own ambition. So when people talk about Burnham's fantastic foreign policy, you have to read a fellow who was an intimate part of the PNC. His name was Festus Brotherson, Dr. Festus Brotherson, right? He was a member of the Central Executive, a protege of Dr. Ptolemy Reed, and he writes about Burnham's foreign policy. So basically, when we can talk about it as progressive, Burnham really wanted to utilize, and a lot of what he wanted to bring together, Carifta and CARICOM, was that he wanted to become a leader of that bloc. And that is why he had a lot of fights with Eric Williams, who was an intellectual in his own right, and Manley of Jamaica. One little thing I'll tell you, very few people know this, and I want Freddie to listen to this. James Mitchell was the Prime Minister of St. Vincent after a fellow named Cato. Cato was the president in 67, 68. And Cato writes, and Mitchell reports, that Cato visited Guyana in 67 as Burnham is preparing to take power, and has told the Americans, it's a matter of the records, the CIA records that are declassified, that Burnham says he asked the Americans that he wants to bring in West Indians to tip the scale for him. So when you're talking about a man looking as from 1966, he just got independence, thinking of subverting the electoral system, you have to look at that legacy. And this is what Mitchell revealed, that Cato came from Guyana, returned, and revealed that Burnham wanted Guyana and St. Vincent to be federated. So he could bring in all, therefore they would also vote in Guyana elections. And that is when Mitchell resigned from the St. Vincent Labour Party. And he, of course, would form his own party and then become Prime Minister, throwing out Cato. The point is, I want to say that if you read Festus Brotherson, and he has written a paper called The Foreign Policy of Burnham from 1970 to 1985 when he died. And he gives you chapter and verse that the rationale of Burnham's foreign policies endeavors was all about Burnham, Burnham, and Burnham. Now, when you talk about what he has done, the Americans installed him in 1964. The world knew that. Therefore, the Americans had to show or try to build, and this is all coming out in the declassified files. I could hand you them. They're all out there. Take, for example, the Linden Highway and the West Coast Highway and the Quarantine Highway. The Americans built that. They gave him funding to build those highways, and they funded it. You understand? of course, we can say, well, Burnham did it. But we have to then accept that if Burnham wants to be a progressive, which is his whole point, I want to be a third world progressive. I'm going to hang out with Tito, and I'm going to hang out with Nairi, and I'm going to hang out with, all these people out there.
Right.
But yet, at the same time, we know the man was paid by the CIA. He went and is there. He asked for $10,000 a month, and he was given $7,000 a month. So how can you say that you are with the freedom fighters of South Africa?
A leader asked the CIA to pay him money.
Burnham to pay him.
That
is a matter of the record.
That's been
in the dossier.
Yeah.
That's an old news.
Mm-hmm.
So he got the PNC was built on 7,000 US a month after Burnham is in power. So we have to talk about what he did at all levels when you're talking about that. And that is why Patricia Rodney, when the South African government awarded him the Tambo Award, South Africa's highest award.
Wanted to award him.
They didn't award but they had to rescind it.
Yeah.
It had already been, not fully, but it had been there. And she wrote a piece and it's there. And she describes him as a dictator. She described him as a racist dictator, right, with his policies towards Indians. Patricia has it there. You get me? And so I want you to pick any aspect of national life. Take, for example, the economy. Burnham, between 64 to 68, pretty much nationalized the rice industry. You had to sell your paddy, all of it, to Burnham. So he bought from the Indians cheap. Then he created mills that he made his people run. PNC supporters, all the mills, whether it is in Blackbush Mills, whether it is the mills at Sukubo, whether the mills at Wakenham, West Coast at Ramsek, everywhere, they were all constructed by his people. J.E. Green, who's presently the Chancellor of UG, wrote a paper on that as to how the patronage was moved from agriculture into areas like manufacturing, where all of it was towards Burnham people. But the point is, he destroyed the sugar industry because by buying cheap and selling there abroad, taking that money for his own use.
Sugar levy.
No, I'm talking rice.
But
The rice.
I'll come to rice. I'll come to sugar. So sugar was destroyed first. It plummeted because those people, why would they plant? It was Clive Thomas who wrote, and in those days, your average farmer had less than 5 acres. And if your party can't get paid, he destroyed it. So he destroys rice. He then destroys sugar because my father was a cane cutter. You're talking of the only time a sugar worker got a little bit of money where he could buy a bicycle or buy a 3-piece living room suite. Was at what we call the profit sharing. Profit sharing was won in 1968 by the Crane Commission. And it was supposed to be 60% of the profit to the workers, 40% to the industry. So you could replace the factory. Burnham, when sugar had gone 6 times the price in 1974, institutes a levy and takes that levy, and we'll talk about that, what he did with it. The point is, however, those sugar workers never got a profit sharing till 1999 when Ravi Dev and others formed the sugar union. You understand? And profit sharing was returned. But the most important thing, they're talking about the sugar industry being destroyed. The 40% of the profits that was supposed to be reinvested to keep the factory replenished and reinvested and all that, like and more, was never reinvested.
Ravi,
so the point is, let me just finish. The point is that you pick any industry, even bauxite. He nationalized bauxite in 1970. But he put his own people there to run it. And if you can see that the production of bauxite fell every year. We were the sole producer of calcined bauxite. The biggest, not the sole, but the largest we had, because we had the most highly concentrated aluminum oxide, which you make kiln. The bricks to make kiln to smelt iron and what have you. And we couldn't meet our supplies. So therefore, the Chinese and others, they came in and took over that market, because he destroyed it by his politicization.
Let me ask you this.
Interesting.
Do you think the decision to assassinate Rodney was based on his fear that Rodney would have overthrown him and executed him? Do you think Rodney would have, if he had fallen, Rodney would have put him on trial and
Well, you see, we don't
institute the death
You
penalty?
see, we don't have to.
Do you think Burnham was faithful of that, and so he took that unprecedented decision that the world would have reacted angrily against?
Well, we don't have to guess. In the 1979 Congress of the PNC, right? Burnham very clearly talks about the threat of the WPA. He talks about firing people in the public service of who were suspected to be sympathizers of the WPA.
My question is...
Let me come to it, because everything has a context. I don't want to put things in people's mouth. So there's a book on the 1979 Congress where all of this is written, it's on record. So Burnham said, he talked about how he saw the WPA, and he said, what he said, my steel is sharper. And he said to the WPA, prepare your wills. This is not guess. So you say this in December 79. Rodney has now declared that Burnham has to go by any means necessary, and the man is assassinated in 1980, and the Commission of Inquiry has now said that Burnham is intellectual author. So why would he want to assassinate? We now know, we don't have to guess. He assassinated Burnham. That's the official Commission of Inquiry has concluded that he was the intellectual author.
Burnham was the intellectual
author. He didn't actually put the wire together and all that, but he was the intellectual author. Now, why would he do that? Rodney had infiltrated the army, and in fact, that is why Burnham put David Granger in 1979 to be the head of the Guyana Defense Force.
And McLean to be Chief of Staff.
So the point is, Burnham was preparing. He was now clearing the way in the GDF, because Smith is from the GDF. You get me? He will have, and that's when, after Smith did what he had to do, and if you read Andai's piece, you will talk about how she talked personally, because Donald, Rodney's brother, goes to her home, because he's right near where she was living there. That's the first home. And when he went there, she could talk about what she saw. The point is that there's no need to guess, right? He was afraid of Rodney infiltrating the army. He was afraid of the multiracial crowd that Rodney had been able to put together. He was afraid that Rodney would even use force if necessary, and therefore he would not be very sure about the loyalty of the armed forces since they were being infiltrated. So for those, and I said in my piece, one of the people don't put enough credence to this, that Burnham could not stand the fact that Rodney was able to get the support of Indians. Burnham did throughout his life. He could never achieve that. And you have to understand, Burnham was a very petty fellow.
I know that.
Raymond Mandel.
He denied me a job.
Raymond Mandel and I taught at Central together.
God, he was extremely petty.
Raymond was
morbidly petty.
Raymond was very close to Martin Carter. And Raymond tells a story that Burnham was a guy like this. If you referred a book to him and talk about a quotation, Burnham would go home that night, get that book, read that book, and the next day, you get me, claim to see that he knows it all. So people don't realize that this whole Queen's College thing, that Rodney was not only a scholar, Rodney was a champion high jumper out of Queens. And that is when, imagine a man like Burnham laughing when he heard that they broke up a meeting and
Rodney jumped over
a fence. He said, there's the high jump. No. Yeah. But you see the pettiness when people talk about the greatness of...
But I'm sure our viewers want to hear you other things. Listen, you talk about a big picture, and I'm putting it to you that you may be missing a big picture, or maybe you still have to articulate it. I know you keep carping, rightfully and justifyingly so, on the likes of David Hines. But Ravi, I am seeing the crystallization And I think I began to see it in March 2020, and it changed my life forever. Forever, Ravi. I will never be that person I was, that political mind I had 20 years ago. I know David Hines and Wickford Burke and Sherrod Duncan and them are getting on social media and you undermine this government, confront this government. But there is a subtle and not so subtle mulatto class at work. You know, I just see suddenly Martin Carter's son criticizing this government. Suddenly, then suddenly Rory Westmore's son, both mulatto, half-white people. The Stabbook News is the embodiment of that mulatto middle class. Look at what happened with the extractive industry thing. 2 persons are claimed to have sabotaged it. Both are from the mulatto class. Vanda Vera Radzik, she's from the Vera family, and the guy from the GHRA. I am seeing, Ravi, a resurgence that is poisonous of entitlement by the mulatto Creole class. Explain to me why Isabella de Caries, part owner of the Stabbook News, was so relentless against the Guyana government and saying it's a dysfunctional democracy. Alisa Trotz, who has a big say in the Stabbook News, has never done a column, and she does a weekly column called In the Diaspora, never devoted one to the no confidence motion, never devoted one to the rigged election. None of the women's group, Ravi Dev, I did my research, not one of those mulatto Creole women's group have condemned the election rigging. So I agree with you. I am seeing the David Hines and the incitement. But Ravi, I am seeing a serious resurgence of the mulatto Creole demand of entitlement.
Well, I think I alluded to that in my opening statement, that when Burnham came back, Burnham had to fight off the colored mulatto class. And in fact, I asked them that we need to look empirically as to what has changed since the 1950s. So what you're describing to me indicates to me that the colored, because those 2 classes merged subsequent to the WPA's formation, and those same individuals that you mentioned, they were all very helpful to the WPA, and you were part of that struggle. You would know that Vanda and so on all shared out Day Clean. They went out, they sold Day Clean, they did what they had to do against the Burnhamite regime. So I think the question needs to be asked, and this to me is the most important question that needs to be asked. I asked this question, and I alluded to it before, that in 1964, Arthur Lewis, a colored man, future Nobel Prize winner, asked himself, and uses the phrase, and I quote from his book, The Politics of West Africa. He said, talking about the election coming up, upon counting heads, are the Africans of Guyana to be exterminated? And I was always struck by that statement, exterminated, that if they're voted out, they will be exterminated. And we have to understand where that comes from, because Jagan at that juncture represented, and it was common in the British Caribbean, that Jagan was going to form an Indian state. And Laming, of course, always talks, and he writes it in his foreword to Rodney's book, History of the Working People, that to the black and colored middle class, Indians getting ahead business and politically, they see it as a threat to their own existence. So it comes back to what you're now telling me is that we have not moved very far from what happened when Burnham came back, because they were willing to come together with Burnham, and that they were willing to excuse Burnham excesses, because if you don't do what you do, they will come in. So again, it comes back to culture. How do they see the Indian? Because the PPP in their minds, even though Jagan could have talked till he was blue in the face, and he did speak until he was blue in the face, until Jagdev can talk till he is blue in the face, or until Irfan could speak until he's blue in the face. They have dubbed the PPP government
A coolie government.
a coolie government, right?
Yeah.
Back in the 50s, it was a coolie.
I'm seeing it. I've seen it since March
So let me finish.
2020. Yeah,
So the
yeah.
point is, therefore,
Go on,
that
Ravi.
the coolie is still seen as, and Dai describes it when she was a girl growing up, as coolies not having the right to even consider running this country. So based on what Laming has written, based on what we saw, the top intellectuals, they have moved. I'll give you an anecdote and tell you how far this thing goes. When Jagan, being the idealist he was, thinking of class struggle, he and Burnham goes up to Ghana's independence celebration in 1957. Jagan tries, and he writes in his book, all over the place to get Nkrumah and him and Burnham to get Burnham to come together back, because Burnham had split in 55. This is 57 now. Couldn't get a meeting. Jagan lands in Trinidad on his way back and speaks to Patrick Solomon, right? You know Patrick Solomon
from
from Trinidad. And Solomon tells him, man, how come you were not at the meeting? It turns out that Williams, Adams from Barbados, Bustamante from Jamaica, they had all met with Burnham and Nkrumah outside of, and they told Nkrumah that Jagan was about to set up an Indian state. So Jagan the fool thinks he's coming back, you get me, and he has solidarity with all these leftist people. The point is, what you're describing to me, and this is where David comes in now, it is not a matter of psychology. That's why I don't use the word Freudian. I think it is sociological. You have a group of Guyanese, and they are Guyanese, from the African and that mulatto colored class, who still sees the Indians as not fit to govern. That somehow we still have mud on our fingernails and mud between our toes, and we are not fit to govern.
We worship gods.
Idols, what gods?
Worship
Idols. I mean, you're beyond the pale. You should be stoned for that.
Our name is not easy to write.
Or
Krishnamurti.
Yes.
Ram Logan.
So no, but it is not trivial. We see my whole point. Let's the seriousness of it. These are very intelligent, intellectual people who have studied both from the Marxist standpoint, like David, or from Dr. Blackman, who has studied the liberal tradition in America. He comes out of festival. CT tells me, and comes out of the lower
Well,
class.
that's the guy that you're on Globe Span with.
Yes.
Who said during the election again, they should have had a coalition.
Yes. So no. To come back to the point is, you see, we can't dismiss it, because this is 200,000 Guyanese who have this feeling of existential threat coming from Indians. As to whether there is reality or not is not the point. As it is said in that Thomas's theorem, if men define their perception to be real, it is real in their consequences. And what you saw at Monrepo, and what is being threatened now,
what we see in the Starbuck News.
And what is being threatened, because all of that is linked now to violence. Because the only armor, so to speak, and I use the word advisedly, left to that lot, because after having rigged the elections, I don't think there'll be enough people, and with the Amerindians voting as they do now, that they can get back into office. So what they're being presented with is again the threat that Burnham presented them with. If not us, it's going to be them, and you know what they will do, and therefore we have to do whatever is.
So in 2023, the 40s, the 1940s onwards are here with us. 2023,
well,
mulatto, Creole class, and the African
are tying bundle once again.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm listening to you, gentlemen, and I'm the young person here.
Yes.
I've stayed very quiet because some of these things I'm learning, and when you're in the room with the big boys, you got to listen. My mom taught me that. But I have a couple of questions.
Please.
Number one, I asked you a question about Burnham's contribution, and I've listened very carefully what you had to say about the bigger picture. But would the same argument be used to look at our leaders and their contribution? You could build roads, you could build schools, and you could build anything in Guyana. But if your policies, I think this is what I'm reading for you, if your policies, your foreign policies and your local policies are all bad, then at the end of the day, history is going to judge you. I heard Freddie also said about the mulatto class. I want to ask you, Freddie, if in the hands of the PPP now, that there's any control or any mouth that is there that could dictate to the PPP from the mulatto point of view, that is having a say right now that could sway the direction that they're going, or any. I'm asking.
Yeah,
This is
but
me. The student is asking.
Ravi's
me,
our
right,
guest.
right.
And
So,
he
so
should
maybe
have,
right.
right.
Okay.
I would like to hear from you that, because I don't see any mulatto, because I'm trying to understand context of the mulatto and the class system that you talked about. In today's world, you have a PPP which is fully in control. Where does mulatto come from? Because I
No,
don't
it's not.
understand.
No.
No, I'm just asking. Me,
No,
the
no,
student
no,
is
no.
asking.
The question is
I
that
could let Ravi. Let our guest.
in our parliamentary democracy, you have a party that had to almost be shoehorned into government because a government headed by David Granger, right, was willing to do some of the most ludicrous contortions, let me be kind with my words, to say that they won that election and still do with a straight face.
Acrobatics.
With a straight face. So I am saying, I try to look at matters sociologically. I don't want to get personal because I have friends who are good, who are mulattoes, who are blacks, who I consider my friend. I come from Iflat. I walked the streets of Kashua, my black section, last week because I'm doing a history of my village, and that history involves the people of my village. So I look at it now, what is their fear as a people? Because even after all that acrobatics, to use Freddie's word, they were able to get 217,000 votes, I think, which we can't just blow away. So at an individual level, you understand, we look at what happens when they go into that voting booth. You understand? Those same friends, because I can now go into that booth at IFLUT because we go by constituencies, and I can tell you who voted what and how for whom. You understand? We don't have to guess. So that individual may like me. I think many of them do. When I go through there, they call me by my false name. Everybody knows in the villages we don't have anybody regularly. Everybody has a false name.
What's your false name?
Shobai.
Showboy?
That's it.
So come back to
Showboy?
it. Yeah.
So you were showboy when you were younger.
I always dress well. But to come back to the point is though that they have no animosity towards me when I go back. I was looking for a friend. I went looking for him, Philbert Bourne, right? I said, he's an old man now. We and I are both old men. I went and looked for Philbert. I couldn't find him. I said, man, he's with his son in Buxton because he had lived in Buxton for a while. Visit me. So we have to look sociologically as a group. So there's that group that is opposed to the PPP and is willing to go along with this incredulous claim that 33 is not the majority of 65 when you were in government because of 33 seats.
But who was saying that? Wasn't it the coalition Moses Nagamutu, Nigel Hughes? Are you saying those are mulattoes? I'm trying to have an understanding.
Well, what you are...
No,
okay,
I think...
no, let me finish. It comes back to that. You see, when you take power, and this is where this is a fallacy that was revealed, the PNC, call it APNU, call it what you may, knew that it could not win an election without Indian votes. It said that.
Right.
So therefore, on 2015 February, Valentine's Day, very symbolically, Valentine's Day, they signed an agreement. This is a love match here, right? They went and held hands on the stage, real lovey-dovey. Why? We want Indian votes. You understand? So yet, here's a government that was given that 10% of Indian votes to put you over the thing in 2015, you got in there. And yet, at the end of that year, you announced the closure of 4 sugar estates and throw 7,000 people into the streets. So you want to tell me that even though Nagamutu and Ramsutan is saying it, that was their decision. We'll talk to your friend Charandas. It wasn't their decision. They're not madmen, but they had to go along. And they had to go along because of what? Of the soup, as we say in Guyana. So they were not in control. So when you talk about mulatto and black, and somehow you throw up Kemraj and Nagamutu, they're not taking a position, a policy position. Nagamutu was promised in that Commingsburg Accord. Accord means an agreement used between nations to chair cabinet, to be given more powers. You understand? To chair cabinet means you would then set the agenda. He was not. And the moment he did not protest, when Granger said, but the Constitution doesn't allow that, Well, excuse me, when you were drafting this accord, you didn't know that? Of course you knew. But it shows you their powerlessness and their willingness to go along. All they had to do, and Guyana would have never been where we are today.
Well, can we,
if they could only answer Gildarie,
That's interesting.
they would have just stood out. When I was trying to get something called a center force in 2005 together, the commitment of the center force would have been that we will go in there, and whichever the PVNC or the PVP sets a policy for Guyana, we vote with either one.
Let's look at
right?
the future.
And people like Kemraj Ramjatan refused to talk of that. You get me? So when I went to I went to some of their meetings, and when you talk about mulatto, the AFC meetings, right? There's a girl, I never heard of her, Beverly Harper. Right?
Oh, very, very mulatto.
So she was there. We once had a meeting where she was contributing more than anybody. Chris Ram was there. You understand? So you had individuals, the girl who they gave, they made an MP and didn't give Gomati Smith, Chantel Smith. Gomati is your normal coolie girl from, practicing Essequibo. She wasn't given one. She brought in Essequibo votes, but yet Chantel was given one from that class. So what I am saying, you don't need a flambeau to see what's clear.
But time is going. I'm sure our viewers want to get your views on. We could discuss the mulatto. He asked me the question.
It's not personal, Go on.
He asked me the question. I will discuss the mulatto thing. Ravi, the future. What? Look, you're familiar with political theory as any one of us. A society gets into trouble when the pie is not shared, when people are hungry, when people can't send their kids to school. It doesn't look like we have crossed that pathway. Billions will be coming in. And one can say if the state has that resources, it's got to be very naive not to reach out to people. But do you see in the next 2 years, do you see trouble ahead? Do you see with this oil money and money going around to build schools, to 12 hospitals, I think, is in the cards. Villagers getting roads and lights and increase in salaries. Is that the takeoff, or could there be a violent confrontation because of entitlement?
Well, let me look at the big picture. That since the 1980s with Thatcher and Reagan, the world has moved into what is called neoliberalism in the economy, which is that the government's role should be minimized to let markets make the decisions. So therefore, if you got the money to put up those things over the highway, you should be allowed to do that. And if you fail, then you go broke and you don't make it. And if you succeed, you can then go in and put more up and do other things too. That's the market making a decision. No person is making that decision. So that is the new dispensation. My take, however, is that we have seen the neoliberal paradigm create such inequality where 1%, the top 1% in this world, owns more than the bottom 50% of the world. And we're talking, that's 4 billion people. The top own 1%. So that's what neoliberalism will take you if you don't think. On the other hand, I believe, therefore, that If this opposition is smart, they should pressure this government, right, to define what kind of state, what is the role of the state. We're not a Marxist state to say from each according to his work to each according to his need. That's not the distributive principle. But we, I feel, are a welfare state, and like the Nordic countries, I think we should have decisions on how we should take care of our poor. One, right, that there should be basic medical, free medicine, free schooling, free all of these things. The private sector can do it too, but there must be a baseline. And thank God we are still there, right? My daughter works at GPHC, and it's still free. A former president of this country went to have a small operation at GPHC, meaning it's still good enough.
I went there.
Right, you went there.
February.
Right, almost president went there. So to come back to it, we have to decide what kind of state we have. Now, what we've been in terms of giving handouts, I think the modern principle is equality of opportunity, and the PPP will have to be held its foot to the fire. All of us will have to speak out that there must be equality of opportunity. The problem, however, with equality of opportunity, what David and the others are asking for, and I'm using David just because he and I have so much discussion on this group span program, they're looking for equality of result, and that is the catch. Between equality of opportunity and equality of result comes the individual contribution. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that individual contribution, you have the opportunities, because everybody now, for example, take this thing of my friend Nigel Hughes, talking about people did not get bids. Only Indian people got those contracts. But as I have been pointing out, I am associated with the Guyana Times. I see every day the announcements for advertisement for bids for X, Y, and Z, right? Every day the paper has more ads for bids than anything else. So therefore, everybody should know that these bids are open. The second part of it is that people will then make their bids, right? Ipadaji, the government, everybody is helping African Guyanese and others to learn how to prepare bids. Ipadaji has been doing this for years now. Even if they hadn't, at least they're being trained to. Make your bids. The opening of the bids is a clear, open, transparent process where there's people there looking on. You understand? And the bid with the lowest bid, or there's got to be some reason, they get the bid. I am saying the opposition, if it feels that there's some, something going on there, they should be able to work to get that identified. Because I'll tell you what, I come from a school of thought. Immanuel Kant said, all of us are made out of this crooked timber, meaning each one of us in our inner makeup. Mm-hmm. We have a tendency to go awry. As a Hindu, I also believe, and we are taught that every one of us have the ability to do good or bad. So I'm not going to say anybody's perfect. So therefore, this government will have to be tested. But you just can't make these wild allegations. And
creeping apartheid.
Right. So show me where it is. So coming back to your question, there will be trouble because there will be trouble because you have a very strong. You see, the people who do not have, they are predisposed to pointing to the other. You're the cause why I don't have. Not looking, for example, the thing I pose is that in the Burnhamite years, 23 years.
Well, I mean, who's going to cause this trouble? I don't believe that era is over.
It only took 5 men from Camp Street Jail and I was in politics then, in 2002. 5 men. It didn't take plenty. If I try to listen to the rhetoric that goes on these social media, from the opposition camp followers, and you would be shocked at the kind of open instigation for armed struggle in Guyana.
It isn't going to work.
I don't
think
know.
you
I
know
hope
that.
not. I hope not. But
we
I'm
got,
saying
we
it's
gotta
there.
we gotta end on that note. Operator signaled to us that our time has come.
And
we
Gildarie's not
went
going to
o-
talk about the snake.
No, we went over. We went
I'll
over
tell you
time.
about the snake.
We went over time, but could we do this again in another 6 or 7 weeks? We one of the things I like about this is that some of the things you bring out and you have brought out, we don't know. Therefore, history is being recorded. But the operators in my ears, our time has come. Ravi, it was nice to have you. We got to do this again.
Thank you, guys. Listen, for me, listen, my last word. It's in America, I live in a Jewish section, so the word schlep means to move from here to there. I got to be schlepping from West Coast all the way here. Okay. So you guys gonna have to work out the limousine for me, all right?
Okay.
And the one without snake, though.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you about the snake. But it's interesting. I really
Are we off now?
had a lesson tonight. So there's I think so two things there. One, I think the lesson that we've learned here, that there's always different sides to history, and the second thing is there are opportunities in here, and everybody got to take a chance.
You got to take a chance right now.
Hello.
Good night,
Right
folks.
now. They must.